Okay, this is a book review. The name of the book is called Patriots. It's about the events of 1776 and what followed. It's written especially by David Fisher, but it's really part of the Bill O'Reilly series. I think Bill O'Reilly, and it was used on his show and the news show and stuff. Bill O'Reilly sort of supervised the project, and he's good for making stuff entertaining. He was a very entertaining news guy, journalist, whatever you want to call him. So what I'll tell you about the book is this one was good. It was very entertaining. I've read a whole bunch of books about the 1776 conflict. This is one of the better ones in terms of it's more entertaining. It's pretty fast paced. It just hits the high points. There's other ones that'll give you a much more thorough discussion and go elaborate on a lot of details. This is just sort of the action highlights the Revolutionary War. It's 8 audio CDs, which is pretty short for an audio book. Let's see, GW, George Washington was the most incredible guy of the whole situation in terms of his bravery, his heroism. He was very audacious. He would do incredible things. The British couldn't believe that they would do it. And the men were muy macho. Oh gosh, were they hot-blooded, tough guys. Okay, the founding fathers were great men. Ayn Rand had said, United States is the greatest country in the history of the world. There's no other country founded by a bunch of brilliant men who wanted freedom. And a lot of these guys were wealthy. They didn't need to get involved in this, but they believed in freedom. And they risked their lives to support freedom. Okay, GW required his soldiers to attend Christian religious services. GW ordered his officers to begin each day with Christian prayer. See, that's the other thing, too. All the public schools are designed to groom America for slavery, and so they try to de-Christianize everything because Christianity prevents slavery. Christianity is what got rid of slavery. Okay? John Adams asked TJ to write it. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration, and Jefferson's a lot better than Adams. Adams did some good things, but Jefferson was a genius, and Jefferson was a much stronger proponent of freedom. I'll get to that later. Friendship with Christ conferred dignity on the poor. Christianity is the friend of the poor. Why do you think these big countries, these big communist countries get rid of Christianity? Because Christianity promotes the poor. No, they want the poor to be just little farm animals, serfs, slaves. They don't want a religion that says that they're equal in the eyes of God, that they can appeal to get outside of, the evil tyrant authority. All right, see, what else? Paul Revere did a lot of great things too. Lots of these guys were just great and heroic. The British hired many thousands of German mercenaries, the Hessians they were called, and they greatly outnumbered the Americans. The Americans were very brave, courageous, and clever in how they responded. And the Brits were quite brutal, like Banastra Tarleton. I know how awful the British were because I'm pretty familiar with Irish history, for example. Okay. And I think this is sort of the best my favorite painting from the Revolutionary War, and this really tells the story. So this is, George Washington at Valley Forge praying next to his horse. This painting was by Arnold Freiberg. He's a great artist, Arnold Freiberg. He did all the paintings for Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments movie as well, and a bunch of paintings for the Mormons as well. And I really like the Mormons. I know a lot of them, and the ones I know, they're all good, man. Even though people go ahead and criticize them, go ahead and meet them in person. You'll wish your daughter marries one of them. Okay, GW was praying all the time, sending his men to Christian services, and he was a very heroic guy. Like I said, he didn't have to do this. He just wanted freedom for America. He owned thousands of acres of land. He could have done whatever he wanted. Okay, so it's an amazing story. This is a great painting, best painting of the Revolutionary War. Okay, here is the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson and then, gone over by some of the other persons here. There's Ben Franklin, there's John Adams, and what a bunch of great men. And the other thing, too, is, everybody always trying, the mantra of the modern world is diversity, diversity, diversity. This was not diverse. This was a bunch of heterosexual white Christian men, okay? That is by far almost all of the founding fathers. There's a few exceptions to that, but that's almost all of them, okay? And that's one of the reasons why, commies hate them, because they did this. They made a free country. They empowered all the people, all the pros. Why do you think Communism wants to get rid of heterosexual white Christian men because it sees them as a potential problem. It actually respects them. The reason it hates them is because it respects them. It doesn't respect anybody else. The reason why all this affirmative action stuff, all this, PC correctness, all this stuff is designed to get rid of the white Christian man. As far as the communism is concerned, he's the only real obstacle. They consider everyone else a joke. They consider women a joke. They consider minorities a joke. They consider everyone else a joke. He's the only one they see as any significant ability to change the course of events from worldwide communism. Okay, and so that's why they hate him. That's why he's scapegoated. That's why he's demonized all over the place, because they see that he, in their opinion, has the potential ability to prevent communism. Okay, and the rest of the public is so groomed by the public schools and all this nonsense that they're easy to make into slavery, is the belief of the communists. Okay, and you ask yourself, here's George Washington, the greatest heroic American ever, and how come we don't have a holiday for him? There should be a holiday for him. The reason we don't have a holiday for him is they don't want you to know about him. They want to keep him a secret. Okay. Okay, here's a typical thing back in those days. In the same area where they would do their legislative work, they would then have religious services. They had religious services all the time. They're always praying together, okay? That was modern America. They had their church services in these buildings. And Thomas Jefferson went to every single one. He's in all these different Bible studies. He was reading the Bible in all these different languages and comparing them, giving Bibles to all his family, friends, his students. By our modern standards, he'd be a religious fanatic. They're trying to rewrite history and try to tell you it wasn't super Christian. It was super Christian. They had pastors talking all the time and heavily involved in all this stuff. Okay, here is the Battle of Lexington, and there's some famous poems from that. Of course, Listen, My Children, and You Shall Hear of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Okay, so that's great stuff by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the Ralph Waldo Emerson poems too. I remember reading this stuff when I was in grade school. I caught the tail end before America sort of drifted into this. JFK was sort of, America's last hurrah of having a president that really wanted freedom. Actually, Reagan kind of wanted freedom too. I'll give him some credit, but we've really gone downhill from those days. And really sort of like the apex when things looked like they might get good was JFK. And once he got bumped off by the commies, we've been kind of gradually, progressively going down the tubes. So like I said, I remember memorizing this poem in grade school. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to the April's breeze unfurled, here once in battle farmers stood, and fired the shot heard round the world. Okay, the Battle of Lexington. All right. Then here was Bunker Hill, where the Brits thought they were just going to crush the Americans, and the Americans were so brave that the Brits kind of freaked out. Oh my God, this is not going to be a cakewalk. They just ran out of ammunition, the Americans. They weren't in very good shape. As Hamilton had said, we have a shortage of rifles and the British make our rifles. So the Americans had a tough time in that sense. Okay, and there's just another nice painting. John Trumbull, he lived right around that time, so he was able to paint all these scenes and speak to people who were actually there. Here's a nice painting, the spirit of 1776. Now, let me tell you something. These guys were brave, tough guys who had a lot of hardships. There was none of this modern crap about, there was nothing about genders. There was nothing about, castrating grade school students, drugging grade school students. All this modern craziness about drugging all the children, castrating children. It's all insane, okay? Nobody castrated children. Nobody did any of these terrible things. They were brave, honorable men who served their country because they wanted to be free, okay? It was heroic. It was good. All right, it's not perfect. They always made some mistakes, but man, they were good. They were 1,000 times more noble than the British. Okay, here's Patrick Henry, and just to give you a sense here, I'll give you a Patrick Henry speech. And these guys all know that they would all be hanged by the British if they hadn't won. Here's crap, it's maybe part of it covered up, but guard with jealousy. This is Patrick Henry's speech. Guard with jealousy the public liberty. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined. It is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of the siren till she transforms us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of the number of those having eyes who see not and having ears hear not the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation. I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it might cost, I am willing to know the whole truth. Give me liberty or give me death. That is the great Patrick Henry. And that's pretty much the attitude of the Founding Fathers. Okay, here's Thomas Jefferson, a noble son of a bitch this guy was. He's very tall. He's like 6'2". He's a redheaded guy, very introverted, spoke multiple languages, was constantly collecting books and reading in all these different languages. Finally, they got the Declaration improved by all 13 colonies on July 4th, 1776. And then they later added a Bill of Rights onto the Constitution. That came about 10 years later, about 11 years later, okay? And here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there it is. There's the biblical worldview, that man is created in the image of God, endowed by the Creator with rights. They come from God. These are natural rights. And either you have these or you don't. Once you push God out of the public sphere, man becomes a farm animal owned by the ruler. And anybody who doesn't think that's true doesn't know history. It's obvious. Okay, Ben Franklin draws electric from the sky. So Ben Franklin was a genius. I mean, he got rich by the time he was 38 and he could retire and do whatever he wanted. I'm jealous of him. Most men were stuck working, as wage slaves in some type of job, Okay, Ben Franklin. Here's a nice painting, 1767. Intellectual here. He was famous for seducing women. Apparently, he was very good at that. Here's a quote from Ben Franklin. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. When truth and error have fair play, the former is always an overmatch for the latter. Yeah, he was another brave guy, wealthy guy. He didn't need any of this, but he did it because he wanted freedom. This is the famous story, I cannot tell a lie. When he was 6 years old, he chopped down a cherry tree. Grant Wood's the guy who also painted American Gothic. Okay, here's just another painting of GW. When they got all their artillery up onto Dorchester Hill at night, and that was an incredible thing. Totally surprised General Howe, and he was forced to flee from Boston. So it was an incredible achievement how fast they got up there and got ready. This is also painted by Emanuel Lutz. He's the guy who painted the Crossing the Delaware painting, which is super famous. And a little bit of what it was all about. It's kind of reminiscent of, the Romans and fighting the Carthaginians in the Carthaginian War. So basically, Hannibal was the greatest general in the world at that time, back in, about 200 BC. And he was just kicking the crap out of the Romans. And they were all scared of him. In one battle, he defeated like 60,000 Romans. And so they're freaked out by him. And so they finally got a guy by the name of Quintus Fabius Maximus. And this became called the Fabius strategy. He knew they couldn't go head-to-head with Hannibal. Hannibal was just too great of a general. And the Brits were just too overpowering in their force. But what they could do is delay and try to wipe out the supply lines of the Carthaginians. And so that's called the Fabian strategy, and that's how they ended up defeating Hannibal. And to some extent, that's a little bit what George Washington did, as well as a guy named Marion. He was called the Swamp Fox. And he was a pretty amazing guy. And there were other ones, too. A lot of brave, clever men. And like I said, they're all a bunch of macho men. GW crossing the Delaware on Christmas night in 1776 to defeat the Hessians at Trenton, a surprise attack. And they were rather incredible. Look at how magnificent this painting is. Again, by Emanuel Lutz. It's just awesome. And this was an emotional turning point in the war. This gave the Americans confidence. Instead of retreating and getting their butt kicked as they had on many occasions, they now were able to come up with a big victory. And that just sort of, helped prevent guys from deserting, helped guys to renew their charter with the service. Because he was constantly running out of men and supplies, and they were, worried about starvation, etc. So here's when they captured the Hessians at Trenton. Major victory in 1777 on Christmas, the Christmas battle. Okay, here's GW and Lafayette at Valley Forge when they're freezing and starving. Okay, and Lafayette was a real heroic guy. He was much younger, but very brave and heroic. He's a real rich French guy, and he also did a tremendous amount to help to get the French come on to our side. And then here is sort of the brutal guy, the British guy, Banastra Tarleton. And he was just brutal. He would just, when guys would surrender, he wouldn't allow that, and he was awful. That was called Tarleton's Quarter. Francis Marion was the Swamp Fox. There's a great movie about Francis Marion. It's called The Patriot. It's well worth watching. I highly recommend it. And he spent a long time trying to track down this guy, Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. Okay, Alexander Hamilton was a brilliant guy, a bit of an egghead. He was an aide to GW. GW loved him. I kind of don't like the path he went down, though. After GW's presidency, he was one of the leaders of the Federalist Party, which really wanted more of a centralized leadership and wanted a big central bank and all that stuff. His main opponent in terms of political philosophy was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a representative of the South. Alexander Hamilton was a representative of the North. Thomas Jefferson wanted family farms. Thomas Jefferson glorified the family farmer. So Thomas Jefferson was more in allegiance to the French and the French idea of freedom, versus Hamilton and Adams were more allied with the British and sort of a British perspective, a Protestant perspective of freedom, whereas France are the Catholics, okay? And in my experience, Catholics are a lot nicer than Protestants. Don't get me wrong, Protestants got some good things too, but in general, you'll end up being better off dealing with Catholics, in my experience, than Protestants. There's plenty of exceptions to that, but there's also a lot of truth to it in general. Okay, here is Betsy Ross making the first flag, and the idea was putting the 13 stars onto the blue sky. So there's the sky. These are 13 new stars in heaven, and those 13 stars are the United States, the first 13 states, and the alternating stripes, red and white. And these are the stars and stripes here. Okay, and then later, soon after that, came the Star-Spangled Banner there, and our national anthem. This is GW with Betsy Ross. Okay, and here is the Continental Congress. It was signed officially in 1787. GW is presiding over it. There's Ben Franklin. There's Alexander Hamilton. I know he eventually got bumped off by Aaron Burr. That was kind of a sad, stupid thing. Okay, but look how magnificent this is, and then later on they sort of added on the Bill of Rights, of course, to improve it even more with freedom of speech and all the other important things that go along with it. Here it is, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And of course, tyrants, they want to get rid of all this stuff. So you better cherish it, because otherwise you're going to lose it. It's very close to being almost completely lost already. Hopefully we won't lose all this stuff. And then all these good institutions are being destroyed. The Boy Scouts were good. I was in the Boy Scouts. GW is the founding father, and he should be honored. There should be a holiday for him. And the idea of the Boy Scouts, men honoring the great men of the past and learning how to have real skills in the real world, that's valuable. Nowadays, the whole high schools are de-skilled. Those kids come out of there, all they can do is take a Scantron test and send a text message. They don't know how to do anything. Back in the old days, there used to be auto shop. You learn how to change the oil in the car, change the tires. You learn how to make stuff in wood shop, and a lot of other stuff, how an engine runs in auto shop. Nowadays, the only useful thing they learn is how to type. Okay, and then GW was also called Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus was this great man of ancient Rome, and when Rome was in trouble, he would lead them to victory, and then he would retire and go back to his farm. And GW was like that as well. Here's GW turning in his military commission. He wants to go back to his farm. Then they insisted on him running the country. He was the most prestigious man in the whole country. And he served 2 terms as a president, and then he went back to his farm, which is what he wanted to do. So he's a very great man. We should have a holiday for him. And this book was a good book. You'll enjoy it. It's not spectacular, but it's good. And it's good to know the basic history of the stuff. You have to preserve your history or you lose it, and then somebody else tells you what your history are, and they probably want you to be a farm animal is what most of those types want. So anyways, hope that was interesting.